Good evening.
Yep.
I'd like to call the March 8th, 2023 board meeting to order. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Blattner?
Here.
Ms. Wheaton? Mr. Hamlin? Here. Ms. Holovitz?
Here.
Mr. Long?
Here.
Mr. Paulson? Ms. Crabtree?
Here. Mrs. Kolovitz, will you lead us in the pledge? Okay, communication from our host school, Mr. Biskin.
Thank you very much. Sorry I'm late. I was taking a photo with our National Merit finalists. So I want to welcome you. It's an honor for Wheaton North to host the Board of Education tonight. I want to welcome everyone, all our guests. I would especially like to welcome Mr. McDermott, principal of Wheaton Warrenville South, and our fellow district classmates from Wheaton Warrenville South. We started this school year with the quote here at Wheaton North, especially with our staff: "The past is history, the future is perfect." I believe that we have followed that quote as closely as we possibly could. We've had a great year. We really have. We have offered several experiences that we would have in the past, and we're offering more now than we ever have. Students have multiple pathways to find who they are as learners, and we're very proud of them. We have been able to focus on student learning, and we have been able to once again provide opportunities for our students. One of those is our Introduction to Teaching class. This is a class that is in our education pathway. It is a class that exposes students to different experiences inside and outside of a classroom. They get to work with teachers, they get to work with students, and I think the thing that I really like about it is at an earlier age, they're being exposed to something that they will find out if this is something that they really like doing. And just as important, some of them may find out this is something I may not want to do, but it has exposed them and they have learned from it. Students are learning inside and outside of the classroom. We have some students from our class, and we have both of our teachers who teach the class. I'd like them to stand, Mr. Riker and Mr. Zeglin. If you give them a round of applause. They've done an outstanding job leading and guiding our students, and they have been there to listen, I think probably more so than maybe any other class, because students are experiencing things and seeing things that they haven't in the past. But once again, the goal is learning, and they are all learning from it. More importantly, we have 4 students here tonight from Wheaton North who are in our Introduction to Teaching class: Jasmine Guzman, Thomas Drabick, Beatrice Peterson, and Kylie Dolan. If you'd give them a round of applause, they're going to share their experiences with the class.
Good evening, board members. My name is Tom Drabick. I'm currently a senior at Wheaton North, and next year I will be attending the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign with a double major in political science and history and a minor in secondary education. I'm so excited to share with you today just a fraction of this great experience in Introduction to Teaching. Before this year, I was really struggling with deciding upon my future occupation. I distinctly remember choosing this class because I was so excited about the field experience, and I thought that this would solidify my future major or choices. After a few months into the course, I got assigned to Franklin Middle School Social Studies with the great Mrs. Skrzyewski. Now, I cannot tell you a specific point when this class solidified my choice to become a teacher. However, all I know is that over time, through lesson planning, teaching, observing, and classroom managing, that I truly decided that this was for me. I would walk out of the school after each full-day field trip saying to myself, wow, I really want to become a teacher. How exciting is that? Board members in our community, I ask you to continue this wonderful program, and I encourage my fellow classmates that if they even have the slightest yearning to become a teacher, to venture into this course. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine Guzman, and I'm a senior this year at Wheaton North. I'm not yet set on where I want to go to college, but I'm planning on studying elementary education and minoring in Spanish next year. Though my plan seems pretty clear right now, it has not always been this way. Before taking this class, like Tom, I was very conflicted about my major. I was actually between physical therapy and elementary education, which I think are two very different things. When Intro to Teaching was newly introduced to the course selection last year, I decided to take it, and it has been such a wonderful experience. This class was definitely what made me decide to officially major in education. Not only have I had the opportunity to observe at Pleasant Hill Elementary School, but I've also been able to observe and interview teachers at Wheaton North. I've seen all the ins and outs of being an educator, and I can definitely see myself teaching more for the rest of my life. Though I have much more to learn about teaching, I'm grateful that I've gotten a head start to it before my college years. Lastly, I would recommend this course to anyone even interested in the education field because you get a sense of what it is like to be in the classroom from a teacher's perspective. This year, we were the guinea pigs to this course, but I know that it will only get even better from here. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Beatrice Peterson. Wrapping up senior year, I couldn't imagine both my semesters without my Intro to Teaching class. It is such a great experience for students interested in the teaching profession or who just love kids. I've loved every second spent inside the elementary schools and spending time with students in the Wheaton community. I've grown so close with each and every student, and seeing them outside the classroom as well is such a joy. First semester, I was attending Pleasant Hill Elementary School, observing third grade with Mrs. Murray. And currently, I'm at Washington, observing Miss Shepard's fifth grade class. Both grades are totally different from one another, but both amazing. I will be attending the University of South Carolina this fall, go Gamecocks, and I have decided to combine my two loves of science and kids to work to become a pediatric dentist. I've always wanted to work with kids for the rest of my life, and the Wheaton North Intro to Teaching class definitely solidified that. The skills I've learned through the elementary classroom observations apply to working in pediatric medicine as well, such as trust, patience, and forming deep, memorable relationships. And I owe it all to Wheaton North's Intro to Teaching class and thank them every day for these lifelong skills.
Hello, my name is Kylie Dolan, and I'm a senior at Wheaton North. In the fall, I will be attending the University of Iowa, double majoring in mathematics and education. I've always known I wanted to be a teacher for as long as I can remember. In my first 3 years of high school, there weren't any classes for the Intro to Teaching, but there were for every other occupation. I didn't really notice how much this helped someone like me and my fellow classmates. It gives me a chance not only see into what I will be doing in the future, but also decide on what grade I wanted to teach. Not only did it solidify what I wanted to do with my life, but it also gave me something to look forward to. The full days we were there were some of my favorite. By the second or third full day, all of my students were recognizing me and would get excited as soon as they walked through the door. And yeah, there were some challenges, especially with being in middle school, but along the way, at the end of the day, I will always remember the students I taught, and especially the group of kids that I got to see twice a week. Not only was the students great, but the teacher I was paired with was amazing. I was with Miss Cruzy at Monroe Middle School. So in the end, I recommend this class for anyone who has the smallest thought of being a teacher because it's not one great experience, but it also gives you more respect for all the teachers that you have had in the past and future. Thank you.
Thank you, students.
One more thing I would like to add. I think this is a great example of the incredible people that we have in our district that are willing to, in the midst of their own job, work with younger people to see if this is something that they want to do. And I think no matter what the skills that our students learn in these type of classes that are hands-on and actually doing the work provide the opportunity that they may not get anywhere else. So thank you to all four of you. Mr. Zeglin, Mr. Riker, you do an incredible job, and we're lucky to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Biskin. Next up is modifications to the agenda. Is there any board members that have a modification? Okay, we're moving on to a really exciting part of our night, recognitions and achievements. Dr. Schuler.
Absolutely. So we have an exciting night of recognition and achievement, and mentioned this in a couple of conversations on the way in. We're really recognizing, if you look at the four areas of recognition tonight, we're recognizing our students for academic achievement through the National Merit Program. We're recognizing our students for achievement in the arts and the performing arts through recognizing our all-state musicians. We're going to have the opportunity to recognize students for amazing acceleration in the area of speech through our state champion, both individual and team at Wheaton Warrenville South. And then we're going to be recognizing a student in athletics who was a state champion in gymnastics. So without further ado, I'm going to invite up to the podium Mr. Biskin and Mr. McDermott, who are going to get our recognition kicked off this evening. So.
The PSAT is the national test that our national merit finalists who we have here tonight have taken. And based on that score, they go through a number of rounds. This final one, the national merit finalists, this is the top 1% of scores of all the students who have taken these tests. So that is an incredible achievement on their part. They've worked very hard. They're dedicated students, and we're proud to have them both at Wheaton North and at Wheaton Warrenville South. It is my pleasure to introduce our National Merit finalists from Wheaton North High School: Ashley Huang, Molly Robin, Dixon Stapleton, Adita Wadia, Luke Wells, and Micah Yoder. If you could give them a big round of applause.
Mr. Biskin pretty much sums it up, right? He always gets to the point. We're incredibly proud at Wheaton Warrenville South to acknowledge our three award winners as well. Please help me in recognizing Maya Bose, Elijah Berry, and Sangeetha Shantunu.
About another round of applause for our National Merit finalists.
Both schools are incredibly blessed to have amazing fine and performing arts programs. And tonight we're going to honor some of our all-state musicians. So from Wheaton Warrenville South, Addison Brayla, Richard Liu, Dahlia Vokart, Caleb Watson, and Chloe West. Please join me in applauding for them. I know they're not here this evening, but let's give them a round of applause anyway.
Wheaton North is proud to honor our all-state musicians as well. Please honor Bryce Abend, Cole Morgan, Garrett Vandershoot, Joshua Villanoy, Matthew Hufford, Zachary Larrickers, Archer Matthias, and Charlie Strutzel. Please give them a round of applause.
A few weeks ago, we had what became referred to as State Championship Tiger Saturday, as we crowned several state champions from both our speech and one of our athletic teams. And so I do want to recognize, this is the second time in 3 years that I'm going to bring up the head coach, Dave DiMarzo, from the speech team. And to put that in perspective, there are very few teams in the state of Illinois that win the state speech team trophy, let alone one that's won it 11 times. So I'll hand it off to Dave, and he'll introduce the team and talk a little bit about their journey. Dave DiMarzo.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Board of Education and Administration. These groups of students that I'm about to introduce to you, it's 8 students that placed in the top 6 in the respective events at the state finals for speech. They represent our 26 students that were on our regional team, our state team, and they represent the 82 students that we have on the team. And it's that full support. And we truly have a district and a board and administration that supports the performing arts and activities just as strong as our academics and athletics. And it's truly that support that allows these students to shine in different ways. And we're really appreciative of that. The speech competition, it's one class, so there's 190 schools that entered the tournament. And so these students had to qualify from the regional to the sectional, and then they had to qualify from the sectional to the state finals. Which is judged from college professors to high school teachers to professionals. I'm the only coach here tonight, but I'm not the only coach who does the work. There are 8 coaches, and it's a great mixture of teachers and people in the community. And one thing that we should be proud of is, of the 8 coaches that we have, 6 of them are products of District 200. So we have 4 coaches that graduated from Wheaton, Warrenville South, and we were able to steal 2 that graduated from Wheaton North. So we have both high schools represented on the coaching staff, and it's a testament to the lessons we've learned and the support that our community has given us. But these students have worked on their speeches all year and show a whole different wide array of skills. There's 14 total events, and I'm going to introduce them as they come forward. And there's 14 events, and we had 3 of them are state champions, which is really unreal. And Mr. McDermott mentioned how it's our 11th state title as a team. Out of the last 10 years, we've placed in the top 3 9 times. And so it is a real testament to the program, their buy-in, and the mentoring, because not only do they work on their own presentations, but they support each other. So let me introduce them, because they're the ones who actually did all of the work, and I'll have them stand in front of me because they're the ones who should be in front. So placing 5th in the state in humorous duet acting are Olivia Bouchard and Colin O'Malley. Placing 3rd in state in dramatic interpretation is Santiago Mosca. Placing 3rd in state in impromptu speaking is Tori Barson. Placing 3rd in state in radio speaking is Emily Sklenica. And then placing 5th in state in original oratory, and our school's first ever informative speaking state champion is Jacob Perdue. And then 1/2 of the state champion dramatic duet acting is Sam Rizzo. And the other half of the state champion dramatic duet acting and state champion in prose reading, so he was a double state champion, is senior David Allgood. And so as they compete as individuals, they score points, and then that collective points from the individuals was the most of any school in the whole state, which is why then they were able to be state champions. So let's give them one more round of applause. So thank you.
Congratulations, thank you.
Congrats, Emily. Good job. Good to see you. Congrats. Sammy, congrats again, my man. Way to go. Congrats.
We'll get it, don't worry.
Awesome program.
Something that makes that state tournament really unique is when students get called to the stage in the final round that they're in, they sixth, fifth, fourth, third, all the way down to first. And when you win, they put a medal on you, they stick a microphone on you, and they say, "Do it." So you get to perform in front of anywhere between 500 and 1,000 people on the spot after possibly one of the most exhilarating moments that they've ever had. So it is something to see, and we're working on getting some of those links so that we can share them with you as well. Speaking of exhilarating, if you've ever been to a gymnastics meet, what they can do on the floor, in the air, everywhere defies logic to me, but it's beautiful to watch, and we are very fortunate to have a state champion of our own between our co-op, which we share between North and South. Haley Hinckley, who's coached by Ms. Kermend and Melissa Sender. So if they could come on up and talk about that real quickly and introduce Haley, that would be wonderful.
Hello. I just want to share what a pleasure it is to introduce Haley today. Haley placed 5th in the all-around and 1st as a state champion. I think the all-around personally is a little bit harder, but the state champion is something that is truly remarkable to be recognized for. She is the 6th female in our school's history, the first state champion in girls gymnastics from Wheaton Warrenville South High School, and the 2nd in our district. We had one from North about 5 years back. So we really just want to celebrate all that Haley does. Just as Mr. McDermott mentioned, it is certainly difficult. It's a long season, and to see her do her best at the last competition of the season in front of thousands of people is an amazing sight to see. She's represented our program very well. She's represented our school district very well. And so I'm very happy to be here with her. Thank you.
Congratulations. Way to go. Awesome. Congratulations. Great job. What's up, Coach?
Thank you to our students that are here tonight. What a great way to start a board meeting. Next up is my president's report. I have just a few things. Seeing kids here today just reminds me of that importance of keeping our students engaged and the connections. Especially, I love seeing our faculty staff that's here today too, that have connected with our students and given them this opportunity. I want to talk just a couple things. First off, I had the opportunity. I was invited to Whittier twice. They're one of my adopted schools, twice in a week. And I got to see 3 really amazing things. The first was a 5th grade wax museum. If you've never seen a wax museum, I highly encourage you anytime that there is one in the district to go and see it. Those students literally strike a pose. Now, I used to do this as a teacher myself, but they strike a pose. It was amazing. I mean, it was truly amazing. They picked biographies, and they studied their person, and they dressed in character. And I mean, some of these poses, I don't know how I stayed there for, I think it was 3 loops till I could get through and see everybody. And I mean, they stand there for at least 10 solid minutes and not move. So it was really amazing. They learned so much, had great opportunity to talk with some kids in that afterwards. I also made another visit, and I was invited to see 2 things. One of them is our SAIL program. I know I've talked about it once before. That program is amazing. We have a primary and an intermediate SAIL program, so it's our students with autism, and they have an art pullout that was unbelievable. And so much time and energy goes into this, but what a rewarding experience. So I believe it's the occupational therapist and the art teacher bring both classes together, and they teach a lesson, and it was about a 40-minute lesson. And there is so much planning and purposeful teaching that goes into it, but what a successful opportunity for students as they produced these amazing art projects. But what I really enjoyed was, as I was sitting there, as they were finishing, and everybody was kind of finishing at a different time, they have some choice boxes, and some kind of came over and were teaching me how to flip these little, I think they're called squidgies or something. The encouraging words that they were giving me and giving me little tips and stuff, it was a wonderful experience. And that is such a great opportunity where we took 2 specialists in that building to work together and give a really great opportunity. So I just wanted to call out the SAIL. And then the second thing was our 5th graders again they have a leadership club, and they went down, and Whittier is going to be getting a new LLC. And they went down and they did a PowerPoint presentation and took questions from first graders. And so the first graders were asking questions like, what's it going to be like? And they were showing pictures, and they were able to, talk them through what it was going to be like. And it was just really nice to see that leadership. And then those first graders really looking up to the 5th graders. So that was just an amazing opportunity. And then just the final thing is next week is my quarterly large unit IASB meeting. So board members, it's next week, I think on 17th. If you have anything that you would like me to ask at that meeting, just let me know, and I will do so. Okay, next up is public comments. In accordance with Board Policy 2.230, members of the public wishing to offer public comment have the opportunity to do so. A public comment sign-up sheet was made available until 7 p.m. Board meetings are available for viewing via the live stream on the district's YouTube channel. As with all public comments, please be aware that it is the board's regular practice to not directly discuss, ask questions, or take action on public comments until the time has been taken to gather adequate information. The board is there to listen. Lack of action or direct response following public comments does not imply any lack of interest in what is being shared. Per Board Policy 2.230, the time allotted for each person to speak in public comment may be shortened. We will not be doing that tonight. To preserve the confidentiality, the board and its president request items relating to either personnel or students be provided to the board privately or in writing for consideration in a future closed session if necessary. The board must protect the civility and decorum of the meeting. Please be respectful for the duties of the board, our district leadership team, and the democratic process in your public comment. Please include your name and whether you are a resident of the district. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Mr. Hanlon will raise his hand and let you know when the time is up. Please be factual and courteous and do not include statements that are personally disrespectful or condescending to board members or board staff. We have 3 people speaking tonight. The first is David Eaton.
Hello, my name is David Eaton, and I've taught driver's education here at Wheaton North High School for the last 20 years. I was honored when our union asked me to represent our Wheaton North staff tonight at the board meeting. When I was asked to speak about why Wheaton North is a special place, there were a lot of wonderful things that immediately came to mind. There's no way that I'd be able to explain all the great things that take place at this high school in just 3 minutes. So in an attempt to narrow it down, one word kept coming to my mind: family. When I began my teaching career here 20 years ago, the first thing that stood out to me was how welcoming and invested everyone was. It was very apparent that Wheaton North was not a place where you just came in, did your job, and left. Being a Falcon meant being part of something bigger than yourself. Being part of the Falcon family meant building lifelong relationships. Perhaps I have a tendency to take things very literally. In my second year here at Wheaton North, 32 new teachers joined our staff, and among them was my future wife, Stephanie, who I married 2 years later. My wife, Stephanie, has also been in the district. This is her 19th year here at Wheaton North as well. And it is because we love working at Wheaton North so much that we wanted our two sons to get a District 200 education and eventually graduate with a Wheaton North diploma. We are extremely excited about the opportunity that they will have to get that Wheaton North diploma, because it is not just a piece of paper. It represents excellence in education inside the classroom and out. Our principal, Matt Biskin, always says it's not about the content, it's about the relationships. I would be lying to say that we never face any challenges here. And to be honest, it's the challenges we face here that make Wheaton North different. It makes Wheaton North stronger. The world is a different place since I started teaching 20 years ago. I can remember telling one of my classes that I will never send a text message because what can you actually get across in 150 characters or less? I obviously missed out on that one. But in these last 20 years, we've weathered economic crises, global shutdowns, the loss of parents, spouses, friends, and colleagues. But what makes Wheaton North different is the challenges we face do not divide us. They actually bring us closer together. Students and staff have a special understanding that no matter the obstacle, we will get through it together. The challenges we face will allow us, the students and staff, to build genuine relationships and allow us to say and mean, we are Falcons, we are proud, we are North. Thank you for having me here tonight, and I hope you enjoy your time as much as I do.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. Next up is Ethan Spade.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ethan Spade. I'm a junior here at Wheaton North. I attended Sandburg Elementary School and Monroe Middle School, and my family has lived in the district for 33 years. I've spoken at many board meetings in the past, and I'm grateful that us students have this platform to be able to share our opinions on things that are happening in the district. As I'm sure many of you know, this is the last board meeting before our next election. And today I'm here to say thank you, both to Mrs. Crabtree, the president of the board, and Mrs. Booten, who are both not running for re-election in April. Mrs. Crabtree has served on the Board of Education for 8 years, and Ms. Booten for 4. They both have volunteered countless of hours on a multitude of different committees, councils, and PTAs prior to their elections. You both have done an amazing job leading our district, and I thank you for that. As someone who isn't able to vote but feels the impact of most decisions that you make, I truly appreciate everything that you have done. I can't fathom the emotional toll that this has put on both of you and your families. In addition to that, I would like to ask everyone who is able to please vote. Election day is April 4th, and early voting is open. Please educate yourself on your candidates. In this election, there's a slate of candidates running to fill 4 seats, and this slate is filled with hate that feeds off the fear that they create. They spread false information and create an incorrect notion about books. We rise above this false narrative that one book in our high school libraries will ruin all 4,000 high school students' education. We value benevolence over bigotry. My family is proud to be voting for Julie Kulovitz, Mr. Dave Long, Mr. John Rutledge, and Mr. Eric Jerpy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spade. Last up is Harold Longs.
Good evening. My name is Harold Longs, and I am a resident of the district. I really didn't want to be up here today, but I just want to discuss policy 2.105, ethics and gift ban, prohibited political activity. And number 2 says, no board member or employee shall intentionally use any district property or resource in connection with any political activity. And resources do include emails and that go through the school server. Now, there was an email sent out from the school board, from one of the school board members, saying, this is from Mr. Dave Long. It says, hi, thank you. I'm going to get one of your yard signs this week, any interest and signs for people I'm supporting, Julia and Eric. No worries, but just wanted to ask. Now, since when is electioneering allowed, in the school board, inside the school and school board emails? I just find that really, done poorly, and I hope the school board does the right thing when it comes to addressing this issue and following your own policy regarding what you're supposed to do with the ethics. There's a bunch of enforcement on the back page of your policy, so I hope to hear back and see what's going to happen with this enforcement, with this not following the policy and using school resources for political purposes and electioneering. Thank you.
Okay, I am going to make a statement. I can confirm that today I received a complaint concerning an alleged violation of Board Policy 2.105 against one of our board members. On behalf of the board, I have directed the board's legal counsel to review and investigate the complaint and apprise the board of its findings. Such a legal review is necessary process for complaints made against board members. Until that process is completed, we are not able to comment any further on the complaint. Okay, next up is Superintendent report.
Yeah, just very quickly, we kind of front-loaded the meeting with recognition today, which was really a lot of what I wanted to include in my report was a lot of the celebrations, recognitions of our students. One thing I just want to mention to kind of round out the experience from the beginning of the meeting tonight is that in the thank yous, I want to make sure that not only do we thank and recognize the students that obviously we're here this evening and recognized for their accomplishments, achievements, but that we recognize obviously the staff that have provided the experiences. I recognize today that we had a ton of parents that brought our students here and not only brought them here for the recognition tonight, but get them to all of the amazing activities and opportunities that we have. We're blessed as a school district to have such a robust program and set of opportunities for students, but it wouldn't be possible without talented students, committed staff, and committed and supportive parents that make it a priority. So again, I just want to thank everybody for the hand in making that happen. Like Mrs. Crabtree, I had an opportunity to attend actually a number of different wax museum events at Whittier. It was at one at Emerson in the last week, and again, just want to commend and thank our staff that are providing rich, robust, and authentic experiences for our students in the classroom. And then finally, I've shared it several times with the board, but the importance of building out pathway opportunities for our students is absolutely critical and essential. I think you heard 4 examples of students that had an experience in the high school that affirmed and or kind of helped to redirect a pathway. I would love to envision the day that every graduate from either of our high schools could walk across and say the same thing. This was the experience inside of one of our schools that got me connected to a future pathway, a future education experience. That's what we're all about. So you saw a microcosm of kind of what that Pathways experience is about, but very much look forward to continuing to work with the board and our buildings as we continue to enhance the opportunities and hopefully have lots more examples of that to come for future boards. So that's all I have for tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Schuler. Next up is consent agenda. Approval of American Government and Civics textbook. Approval of Advanced Placement Calculus ABBC textbook. Approval of Advanced Placement AP Psychology textbook. Approval of Professional Learning Expenditure request for board members. Approval of the resolution to authorize transfer repayable interfund loan from working cash fund to education fund. Approval of the resolution to authorize transfer repayable interfund loan from working cash fund to IMRF fund. Approval of the resolution to authorize transfer repayable interfund loan from working cash fund to transportation fund. Approval of bills and payroll, bills payable and payroll. Approval of minutes February 8th, 2023, open and closed, February 22nd, 2023, Committee of the Whole, open and closed, and approval to destroy recordings of closed sessions prior to October 2021 is allowable by law. Approval of personnel report to include employment, resignation, retirement, and leave of absence of administrative, certified, classified, and non-union staff. Are there any items board members want removed from the consent agenda? Dr. Schuler, any other information?
No additional information. Just want to remind the board that items 5, 6, and 7, those are your resolutions to make repayable transfers kind of interfund. That's an annual process. So as you kind of hit this point in the school year, which is a lower cash point as you get further away from tax disbursements, that's why you have that money in your working cash fund to be able to do temporary loans. They get repaid as soon as tax bills get delivered. So we are on target there.
Are there any other questions or comments from board members? Okay, hearing none, I ask for a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as presented. Moved by Mrs. Booten, second by Mr. Hanlon. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Booten? Mr. Hanlon? Ms. Kolovitz?
Yes.
Ms. Blattner?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Mr. Paulson? Ms. Crabtree?
Yes. Motion passes. Next up is, we have one action item, approval of the resolution to authorize partial settlement agreement of vaping litigation. Dr. Schuler.
Yeah, so as the board might recall, you previously gave District 200 authorization to join in a lawsuit. This was actually a nationwide lawsuit filed by over 1,000 districts across the country against a couple of the major companies that really had a hand in the kind of the rise in the vaping trend. So what's in front of you tonight is approval of a partial settlement. It's a partial settlement because it's a settlement with one of the two companies. It's anticipated that there will be a second settlement that will follow. So the initial settlement is in the amount of $287,000 that will come to the district through the settlement. It's anticipated that the second settlement will be in about the same amount of money. Those funds are intended to help continue to support efforts around drug and alcohol education and support in our districts. So I highly recommend that you approve that authorization tonight, or the resolution.
Questions or comments from board members? Mrs. Kolovitz.
Can I just say a quick thank you? I'm sorry. Dr. Salagi was instrumental when we first entered into this lawsuit. We had a number of pieces of information we had to gather as a part of the district's entry into the lawsuit, and Dr. Salagi was extremely instrumental in helping us to gather that information. So I did just want to recognize him as well. Sorry.
Mrs. Kolovitz.
I was just moving my microphone.
Oh, okay.
I had a question which you answered what the funds were going to be used for.
Anybody else questions or comments? I'm just going to make a quick comment as somebody who writes drug education for a living. I'm very excited that we are going to have this opportunity to do some education on that. So I ask for a motion and a second to approve the resolution to authorize partial settlement of vaping litigation as presented. Moved by Mr. Paulson. Second by Mrs. Booten. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll?
Yes.
Mr. Hanlon?
Yes.
Ms. Kolovitz?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Ms. Crabtree?
Yes. Next up, our oral reports. Our fiscal year 2022 audit oral report. Dr. Schuler.
Yeah, I'm going to hand it right over to Dr. O'Keefe and let him do the introduction.
Thank you, Dr. Schuler. Nick Cavalier, who's in front of you, is a partner with Baker & Tilly. Baker & Tilly is our audit firm. This is the third year that we've been working with Baker & Tilly. We actually have a longer relationship with them, but there's been some bouncing back and forth between different audit firms. So Nick, tonight, what was delivered to you was a draft form. We expect to have the final version of the audit finished in a very short period of time within the next week. I'm sure Nick will touch on that, and he's just going to give you some overall highlights of the audit this evening. We will bring the full audit and all the accompanying and financial statements back to you for approval in April.
Well, thank you for having me here this evening. The board should have in their packet of information for this month's meeting a copy of the draft annual financial report form, which is a state regulatory report. It's not the same presentation as the bound audit report that you'll receive when we issue our final reports. The AFR is required to be issued by every school district in the state and audited as part of your annual financial statement audit. So this was a draft to just let the board know that we actually completed all of our audit procedures and we've actually issued our reports today. They were dated on March 3rd. We just couldn't quite get there to get the final reports to you for tonight's meeting. But those documents will be to you, like you said, very shortly. They're in our production department right now. So, the annual financial report form is a regulatory report. There's 1 or 2 pages in there that really gives a nice high-level summary of the financial results for the fiscal year. It's actually on page, I believe it is 7 and 8. And it's a summary where you have each one of your funds presented in column format, a collective summary of the revenues that were received, expenditures, and then a summary of the transfers and financing activity that may have took place during the year. Just to let you know, your operating funds operated within their financial resources. The education fund had a slight surplus, which was really pretty much attributable to an increase in corporate personal property replacement taxes that were received by the district. We've seen this statewide. That particular shared revenue source has exceeded expectations for fiscal year 2022. The district also utilized ESSER funding, which is the Education Stabilization Fund program. It's pandemic aid funding for various sources of expenses in the general fund, or the Education Operations and Maintenance Fund did not necessarily use ESSER, but the Capital Projects Fund also did. The Transportation Fund had a slight reduction in fund reserves, which was anticipated to some extent because as school comes back online and children are using the buses more often, the state funding for those costs is generally a year in the rears. So we did see a reduction in transportation fund balances, kind of a utilization of fund balance reserves during fiscal year 2022, but this was not uncommon. It was seen in many other school districts as well. And the Capital Projects Fund, which is a fund that the district has used for facility updates and primarily funded through transfers of fund balances, had a slight deficit fund balance at the end of fiscal year 22, but an improvement from the ending of fiscal year 2021's position. Ultimately looking at the district's financial position, I didn't see anything that was necessarily concerning or indicative, of ongoing operational deficits or matters of concern that I would feel necessary to bring to your attention. I know everyone has had an opportunity to review this document. I'd be more than happy to take any questions at this time.
Board members, are there any questions or comments? Go ahead.
Sure. Sure. Yes, so the final issued reports, you'll have all of those documents at the time. I didn't really speak to the opinion this evening because I didn't present it to you because this was in draft format. But once the board has an opportunity to review those documents, if you'd like for me to come back, I'd be more than happy to go over those results at that time too. Sure. Yeah, absolutely, and that's a very good point to bring up. The external financial statements are presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. Your internal reports that you're using on a monthly basis to monitor ongoing operations are on a cash basis. So they only represent revenues essentially when they're received or expenditures when they're paid. Matters regarding if the revenue is to be used for a future fiscal year or if an expenditure is owed to somebody is not represented in your internal cash basis records. So one of the anomalies that has been kind of coming and going over the past 4 years is the amount of property taxes that are distributed from the county to the school district at the end of the fiscal year. So this past fiscal year, fiscal year 2022, the district typically will utilize 50% of the levy, of the 2021 levy, to fund the 2022 operations. If you receive more than 50% on a cash basis, your internal reports will show that you'll have a budget surplus typically. However, when we come out with the GAAP financial statements, there are adjustments that take place to take that revenue from being recognized and place it into a category called a deferred inflow or unearned revenue, depending on the particular source that's ongoing. So there was a sizable distribution that took place in June that had exceeded your 50% threshold for revenue recognition. So internally, you would see a surplus. Ultimately, even as you look at fiscal year 23's records, you will see kind of a lag because those taxes have actually been collected in the prior year. It all gets adjusted at the end, but when you're looking at things internally, it's important to understand those big swings. Yeah, that's one of the things that we do, and we spend a great deal of time on making sure that the revenue recognition is consistent in the financial statements and is appropriate. You're welcome. Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
I just had a few questions. So to Rob's point of some of like the higher level conclusions, on the auditor's questionnaire, do you expect that to change at all between the draft and the final? Or is like a part A for findings?
Let me get to it.
Page 2, I think.
Yeah.
2 or 3.
Yeah, I don't believe that there's anything that would have changed on that.
And then on the financial profile summary, our score was a 3.9. What is that out of?
Out of a 4-point scale. So the financial profile scoring metric, what's really important to understand is that right there on the title, it says estimated. So the annual financial report pulls the balances from within and then applies a series of criteria that are established under that scoring metric, and then will weight your score 4, 3, 2, and 1, and then it averages it out and then determines if your recognition, review, I forget the watch, and then I think there's something else out there. I can't remember them all. But that score that's in the AFR is still tentative until the state board accepts the AFR and finalizes that calculation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions or comments?
Correct. That is not a metric that Baker Tilly calculates. That wouldn't be surprising. Yeah, that's a true statement. The funds that are utilized in the financial profile score are your education, operations and maintenance, transportation, and working cash funds. So they use those 4 funds together, and then they'll apply that criteria. But you're right, the days of cash on hand was at 3.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Next oral report is high school grading. Dr. Schuler?
Yeah, so I want to introduce actually our team from our 2 high schools that are here tonight to give the board an update on grading and assessment in the high schools. Just a little bit of context as Mr. McDermott comes up to get started. Your policy 6.280 is the board policy around grading and promotion, and it delegates the responsibility for developing a system of grading to the superintendent or designees. So I'm here tonight to introduce my designees at the high school who have worked on in the last couple of years some adjustments to our grading expectations, and they're going to share that with you tonight. So, Mr. McDermott.
All right, thanks very much. On behalf of our team, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share some information related to our grading practices and our assessment. Tonight, we're going to take a look at where we were from a grading standpoint, look at where we currently are and how we got there, and then we'll talk about some things that we've learned along the way. So this work actually began way back in 2008 and 2009 when the district committed to professional learning communities, which allow our teachers to meet on a weekly basis and engage in authentic conversation about student achievement, student growth, and student feedback. Around the same time and lasting for a little over 10 years, our teachers and leaders from across the district engaged in opportunities across the state from a workshop and conference standpoint, attending grading, assessment, and PLC conferences. Those conferences were generally most often grounded in the research-based work of Gusky, DeFore, and Wormelli. They would take that information back to the district, work with their teams, and then engage in an opportunity to create professional development opportunities for their colleagues, which their colleagues engaged in during summer workshop, institute days, lunch and learns, and then during our PLCs. So through that work, 3 truths emerged to us. And the first truth was that there were extreme disparities that existed in grading practices from teacher to teacher, room to room, building to building. The second truth was that much of what you're going to hear about today has existed in our district for many years, both big and small, in isolation and out in the open with great success. And then the third truth was that in order for us to really best serve our kids, we needed to make a commitment to consistent practices both across the district and then within our building that were clearly communicated and understood. So we took that on, and then we brought our teachers together our teachers and our leaders together to develop a vision for grading. And then in the fall of 2021, we shared that common vision and allowed some grading pilots to take place at both schools in the spring of 2022. So about a year ago right now, we all engaged in a standardized grading practices, which is where we stand today. I'll finish my part with this. Grading is a very personal thing for teachers. Our teachers are, I've been in 3 really incredible districts, and I really mean it when I say the finest professionals that I've ever worked with. They're thoughtful and they're open. One of the things that you find in any industry is that you kind of get stuck in being able to unthink why you do what you do and how you can grow from it. And one thing that we've realized through our journey is that we, in order to make that step forward, we can't just do what we've always done. We have high standards, and sometimes we need to unthink that in order to grow our students forward. And that's what we owe to our community and to our students. And so what you're going to hear a little bit more about tonight is where we currently are and what we've learned from that. And I'll hand it off to Mr. Biskin.
Mr. McDermott, thank you. So we have all been through school. We all have our own thoughts about school. We all know that school and grades mean different things to different people. For our sake and our work here at Wheaton, Warrenville South, and at Wheaton North, the purpose of grades is to accurately communicate student learning progress through purposeful and timely feedback as students develop enduring understandings and work toward mastery. Our goal is to provide students with transferable skills, learning opportunities that lift all students, and experiences that will inspire lifelong learning. I think tonight you saw an example of that with some of our students. Oh, I got it. So, with that being stated, we all know that when you evolve in a system and the system changes, sometimes there are misunderstandings about what is actually happening. So here are some common misconceptions about grading. Our current grading system does not give students something for not doing anything. It does not offer endless retakes of the same assessment. We are still giving zeros. It's not that we're no longer giving them. And we're not compromise the rigor of our courses and academic standards. We are not doing that. That is not what this was for. This is what it was for. We want our grading system to reflect research-based practices, which again, Mr. McDermott stated, we have a number of our staff who've been trained in this and have evolved in their thinking also about what a grade means. Emphasizes student learning, skill development, and knowledge over behaviors. There is something to be said about some of the things that we have done in the past were more about compliance than they were about actual learning. Our grading system reinforces a growth mindset for students, meaning it's important for you to know this, therefore you're going to do this again so you can master this as best as you can before moving forward. Our grading system improves feedback and communication regarding student progress. Our grading system maintains high expectations for student growth, meets students where they are and moves them forward. And our grading system creates a learning environment focused on raising all students. Now here to talk a little bit about how grades serve as a means to communicate. Let me welcome Dr. Ellett to the podium.
So as Matt stated, grades really need to be a representation of what students know and are able to do. And at Wheaton North and at Wheaton Warrenville South, we set very high standards for our kids. And more, especially over these past few years, colleges have really depended a lot more in the whole process on looking at the grades over standardized test scores. And so knowing that there's been even more of an emphasis on the grades, it's really important that our grades represent what our kids know and are able to do. And so the changes that we've made in our grading practices truly reflect that. And what they also reflect is the increase in communication that we have with our students and measures for growth as well. So with that, what we decided to do in order to have that grade be more of that representation is to make it, and this is standard across both high schools, 90% summative. And those assessments are in a variety of different forms. They're not just the traditional multiple choice tests that we're used to. They're in the form of presentations, projects, essays, all of the different ways in which our kids are able to show us that they excel and what they're able to do. So that is, again, the majority of the grade is that 90%, where you see all of those summative assessments. And then in the 10%, we really look at that as practice without penalty. We also include our homework in that category as well. So this is where students are able to get a lot of that detailed and individualized feedback from teachers. They're able to try those skills again and again until they are at a place where they're prepared for that a little bit more high-stakes summative assessment within that 90%. And so within that, we've wanted to give students the opportunity to have those practice experiences without the penalty of a grade and to really be able to increase that individualized feedback. So with that, the big picture is this 90-10 split. And my friend and colleague, Dan Korntoyer, is going to talk a little bit more about the logistics and what it looks like within both of those categories, along with some of the other changes that we've made.
Thanks, Dr. Ellett. Next, we'll take a look at what some of the logistics look like in this structure. So we'll dig in a little bit further into formative assessments and summative assessments. So as Dr. Ellett mentioned, our formative assessments are worth 10% of a student's grade. Teachers can award zeros for students who don't complete formative assessments. And the messaging that we've encouraged to teachers to share with their students is that the formative assessment is the planning and the preparation that they're going through in order to be ready for a summative assessment. Summative assessments, like Dr. Ellett mentioned, would be your tests, your papers, your project. The summative assessment is going to happen after instruction. So an important thing to understand with the summative is that the formative is the preparation for that, but the summative is after learning. In some cases, that summative assessment might be the end of the unit. In other cases, some teachers will take a large topic and break it into chunks and give a summative at each point, at each marker. Because a summative assessment is worth 90% of a student's grade, there are some things that go with that in terms of support and some different things that had to be addressed in terms of some scaling. So we do have a floor for summative assessments of 50%. So if you're looking at the graphic there, you can see that there is a proportionality problem on a traditional 100-point scale. So if you look at the number of levels that are available for an A, you have 11 levels, B 10, C 10, D 10, but when you get to F on a traditional 100-point scale, there are 60 levels of failure. So in order to balance that out and to make an F as recoverable as a D or a C, we've moved to a 50% floor on a summative assessment. Another component that you see on the slide here is that we have a floor of 40% for a summative that's not attempted, and we really use the 40% as a communication tool. So if a parent or a student sees a 40% on a summative assessment, that would be an indication that they haven't attempted that assessment yet or that it hasn't been submitted. So we have kind of those two things working in conjunction. I think the important thing to understand with the proportionality issue that we're dealing here and why we put in that floor is to make an F recoverable. Under a traditional scale, a student that earns a 0 on an assignment has a more difficult time recovering from that than they would if they had a D or a C and things like that. So that's some of the mathematics and some of the thinking behind those two floors. We looked at Mr. McDermott talked about the process of all this. We looked at a number of different school districts, and I believe Glenbard 87, Naperville 203, and then Maine Township made similar adjustments to we have components of their programs in all of ours. They made their adjustment a year before, so we had the benefit of looking at what they did, and we took some of those components and adopted them as they fit with our district and our schools. And another important part of a summative assessment is the opportunity for a retake and a redo. So because a summative assessment is worth 90% of a student's grade, the stakes are raised, and we do put more emphasis on them. So we want to encourage students to continue learning and also have the opportunity, if they don't have something mastered at a given point, they have an opportunity to remedy that situation. So the way our retakes work is going to look different, and our redos are going to look different depending on the department that you're dealing with. But the retake or the redo assessment will traditionally look different than the original assessment. And our PLCs have installed really good processes for students to show and demonstrate that they're retake ready. That can look a number of different ways in itself. Some teachers will have, or some PLCs will have students do a reflection on how they prepared. Others will have them complete some formatives, come in for extra help during a resource period. There's a number of different ways that our teachers will ask students to demonstrate that they're ready for a retake. Mentioned that the retake would be a variation of the original assessment, and our goal is to have students be accountable for their learning. An important part of the retake and redo concept is that we are re-emphasizing to students that what they're learning in class is really, really important. It's so important that if they don't have it mastered the first time, we want to continue to work with them and continue the learning process so they can master it and build from that point. Like Mr. Biskin mentioned, that we do have retakes and redos that do have a limit, and those are communicated by teachers and PLCs to their students. Just lastly, Dr. Schuler mentioned, we were talking about some of the extracurriculars and the committed nature of our staff. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention the commitment that the staff have made in this area as well. Teachers have changed what they do in the classroom. They've changed how they assess students, and they've really done tremendous work to meet students where they're at, to challenge students when they're ready for it, but to make an adjustment to make the learning the center of what we do. So thanks to the teachers for doing that. Should also mention too that grading is a process. This is something that we're continuously looking at, and we're looking at how we can do better. So it's not a check off the list, we're done with grading kind of a thing. It's certainly something that we want to continue and grow and learn in. So Just for an example, something that we're working on at South this year is providing effective feedback for students. That's an important part of the assessment idea. We're talking about student success criteria, so how do students know before they take a summative if they've mastered a concept, and then student reflection. Once the summative is done or once students have gotten to a point, it's important that they reflect and think about their preparation, think about what they've learned and what they still need to improve on. So thanks for your time and thanks for listening. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay. Board members, questions? Anybody like to start? Okay.
Sure. Yeah, what's really been interesting about grading is, and this change, is the conversations that students are having with teachers and students are having with one another. So instead of saying, I've got this homework assignment that I have to get done, students know when they go into an exam or when they go into a retake exactly what standard they haven't met yet. And that's kind of a unique thing about the retake process is a student might retake an exam or retake an assessment, but they're not retaking the whole thing. They know exactly what standard they have to address, and that's what their retake is comprised of. So the conversations have changed certainly about what it is that they have to master and what they have to do to move forward in a course. I think another change has been, I think we've given some data on our student progress, the number of A's, the percentage of A's, and the percentage of F's. That's all good data too. But we think that the conversations are a really important thing, and that we're stressing continuous learning and that it's not a finite endpoint. You want to share?
One other piece that we've seen in classrooms as well when we're observing is that our students seem to be more aware of their own learning and what they need to do in order to be successful. So by no means do they want to be in an endless cycle of retakes because it's more work to redo that learning. But as they do that, they're aware of what they need to do in order to be successful. So you hear teachers prompting kids about what they need to do, how they need to prepare, and that looks different for a lot of different kids. So it's a lot more individualized as far as kids being able to understand for whatever the class is, whatever the skill is, how they can be successful and what they need to do.
Mrs. Blattner?
I have a couple of questions. Thank you for bringing this. I appreciate that. So I think prior to the change in grading system, retakes were something that were offered. I don't know if it was consistent amongst classes or subjects, but I think they were offered as a way to ensure learning. I struggle with the change of having only 10% being that practice, for that practice score, because we are teaching skills at this age, and some students, whom I may know well, see that homework is not really counted significantly and don't develop that habit of doing the homework that their undeveloped frontal lobe is not able to motivate them to do. So I think that I'm curious if we found there's a fall off in doing homework. And actually, I've heard from other parents, and I think I've seen myself, I need to look at Parent View, that when homework hasn't been done, they have been given 40%. So is that only for the assessments?
The 40% is only for the assessments. It's only within that 90% category. When students don't do their homework, they do get a 0.
Okay, I'm not super sure that I think I have seen that when an assignment is not completed, 40% is being given. And then the mentality becomes, well, I don't really need to do my homework because I understand it anyway, is what I hear. Because I'm getting 40% and that's not really going to affect my grade then.
We do have situations like that. And to your earlier point as well, what we saw before we had the consistency and practices in place is that we would have kids who would do all of their homework and who would get that help from friends or perhaps at home to get the homework completed. And then they would take so they would do well on that. That would be the A portion. But then they would take the assessment and they wouldn't do as well. And so there was a disconnect there just as our kids who would come in and do really, really well in the assessments and then wouldn't have to do the homework, they're great, they could end up with a C, and that wasn't really representative of what the student knew and was able to do. So what this system has been able to do for us is to make that a more accurate representation. And there are kids who don't need to do the practice, and we value that because our kids are involved in so many different things and their lives are busy for a variety of reasons. And we want them to know, we feel that this really compels them and instills the skills when they go on to college to know, here's what I need to do in order to be successful. I know that if I'm struggling, I need to practice more. I know that if I've mastered this, I can focus my energy on something else. So as we've gone through, a lot of different trials and errors over the years, the consistency has really shown more representation in what that grade means.
Thank you. For students who struggle with assessments, despite knowing the material, and despite having the opportunity to retake and still struggling with that testing anxiety or just production, how do they recover their grade without that homework or practice component?
That's one of the things that I think we're very proud of is what our teachers are doing differently that second retake or redo. So there's been a strong movement by our teachers to say, if it doesn't work for you the first time, what can we do differently with that retake or redo that maybe is a better fit? Or would you like to come in and get some support during resource? So that time between the initial summative assessment and the next summative assessment is really critical for a student to reflect about how they prepared, and kind of to your earlier point too. That's something we're working with teachers and students on, is thinking about how you prepared. If you didn't do all of the homework, or if you didn't do all the formative assessments, and that led to a poor score with your summative, what can you do differently before we have you do a retake or a redo? And oftentimes it's complete the formatives and think about how that's going to help you get ready for the summative. And like what Dr. Ellett said is those two things have to connect. Students have to see the direct connection between working on the formatives, the practice, and those have to be directly tied to the summative.
Okay, thank you. With the summative, I personally struggle with giving 40% when the work hasn't been done, because you do give the opportunity to do it again. And I think what I've anecdotally heard with projects, deadlines keep getting extended and extended and extended. I'm sure these are growing pains with the new system, but I do struggle with the fact if you haven't done something, why would you get, if I didn't do my job, I wouldn't get 40% of my salary. So I struggle with that. And I appreciate that you don't want to reward behaviors, but I also think that children need to learn behaviors. So that's all I have. Thank you. Oh, I do have one more thing, but go ahead. No, were you going to comment on that?
What I do want to say is we are really in year one of this, right? Like this is something that is different for all of us. I mean, I didn't go to school and have this grading policy either, but I think one of the principles that it's founded on is, if it's important for you to know this, you're not going to opt out. Because I know in my 20 plus years doing this, we have a number of students that would hide. They would hide. They'd say, I'm going to get the F, they're going to leave me alone, and I'm just going to go. And now, that's not really the case. There are way more discussions happening individually with students. And that, to me, is really good. I mean, that they are really knowing where they're at as a learner and what they've got to do, and they can't really just hide and blend in. It's important for you to know it. You're going to do this again. And this is the plan we're going to follow for you to be able to get to that point. This has not been easy for anybody, I don't think. I mean, again, we've all been through school. We all have grown up through this. But if we want to meet students where they're at, and we have diverse learners, there's no question about it. We have some that come ready to learn, and we have some that maybe are not as well equipped to learn. We've got to meet them where they're at, and we got to try to move them forward. But I totally understand what you're saying, and we're continuing to have the discussions with our staff to make sure that the consistency is across, the board. Because if we're guaranteeing a viable curriculum, the way we assess needs to be consistent too. So we're all working toward that.
Thank you. So my sure. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Let's.
So you're asking a social studies guy to do some math here. So if my numbers are off a little bit, but there's some interesting, as part of the research that we did, you start to dig into some of that and what makes a zero something that's very difficult to recover from. So this won't exactly demonstrate the point, but just take a student who's going to score an 85 on a summative assessment, okay? So a student who scores an 85 on a summative assessment typically, but then gets a 0, what does that do to their grade, and how do they recover from that? So a student, I believe it's saying a student gets 3 85s, 85%, and then gets a 0. So you go B, 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 F. What's their average? It comes out to a 63%. So would you say, well, that student deserves a D? Does that make sense? Is that an accurate representation of what that student can know and do? A student who scores an 85 and then gets that 0, you'd need 16 85% to get your average back up to a B, to an 80 with that 1 0. With a 50% floor, you need 6, which seems to be a more recoverable number. With a 40% floor, if that's the situation that a student is in, and a 40% for us, when we see that, again, that's a communication tool to say, you need to do this. So a 40% in our book would be a temporary thing, because we're going to, like Mr. Biskin was talking about, we want you to do that. We're going to bring in, we're going to get you to take that summative assessment. A student who has a 40 then needs 8 85% to get that average back up to an 80, a B range. So when we talk about recovering from a score, that's kind of how some of that would look practically. Sure. Sure.
And so actually your explanation concerned me again, because if a student has a 0, they have the opportunity to retake it. If they don't and they maintain, like they have that 0, it's because they chose not to do it. Like they chose not to take the test or not to turn in the assignment. So they are getting, like a student who had an 85, 85, 85 and a 0, obviously that 0 is the result of a choice not to do something. But I do understand that, I understand that we want to make something recoverable, and that it's probably, hopefully, rare that a student would choose not to do something, although, like you said, we have diverse students and learners. Maybe this will help. My last question is, how are teachers finding it over this year, like over the year that it's been in place? Is it helping, working?
Well, like I said, we're still working through that. We have teachers that aren't sold on this yet. I mean, and I think anytime you go through a philosophical change and you have practices that have to change that maybe you've been doing for 10, 20, sometimes 30 years, and now we're saying we're going to evolve and change a little bit so we can get to this and we can meet students where they're at. It's a tough pill to swallow sometimes, but I think that would be the case for any sort of change. I mean, we're all creatures of habit. Change is hard. None of us like it, but sometimes we have to do it. And we believe that this is best for our kids, and we're going to continue to be the best at it that we possibly can, so we can try to meet as many students and learners where they're at and raise them up. I mean, it's something where the structure of school has not changed in over 100 years, right? Like how we're structured, EC through 12 has not changed. But all of the demands from the outside, from the inside have. And so we have to look at the practices that we execute on a daily basis and ask questions and say, is this what's best right now for our kids? Because we're trying to get them ready for after high school, right? I have told our staff, I've told our students, high school, that experience, you go through that experience to learn how to keep learning. You got to learn how to keep learning, because that's what's going to be required of you. And I think these practices are steered more toward that than not. But it's a continuous process. We have discussions constantly. This is, just like they had said, this is not something where we say, well, we finished grading and now we're done. It'll be a discussion that keeps going and going, and we'll make the adjustments as needed.
Thank you.
Mrs. Culvis?
Can I share one thing? We talked about the teachers, but I have feedback from kids. I do get the opportunity, I know Matt does as well, to have student advisories. I've got 5 of them. We talk about grading there. What do you like about it? What's difficult? And so the most common theme is that they feel like things have slowed down, so that teachers aren't racing through to get to the next lesson, and they can sit down and have conversations and explain their thought process, which we also hear from our teachers, that is a bonus to what's going on, is that the process is now, as it's tied into the meaning and purpose, we're getting the feedback that we need, and we're then able to provide them with the feedback they need in order to make the gains that they need to make. So I do think that's important. Right up front, kids definitely talked about this is going to be really difficult with a 90-10 weight, which is more in line with a collegiate experience. And in fact, collegiate experience is probably closer to 100-0. But if you look at our data, we're not just kicking F's to D's. Like our D's have decreased, our F's have decreased, our A's have increased, and so it's not just like we're just shifting kids who are failing to the level of D.
Thank you.
Mrs. Kulvitz?
I have a good question. So it looks like starting in 2008 is when we started doing sort of this research into this practice. Has there been any trends or any changes in that research from 2008 to present?
Is the question that there's been changes to what Gusky, DeFore, and Wormelli have?
Yeah.
No, I would say that if anything, they continue to solidify that evolving in your grading practices and assessment practices is important in order to prepare our kids for the world that we're currently living in and the one that they're going to be living in. Who knows what that's going to look like with artificial intelligence and all that, right?
So that was my main question. I just wanted to know what the status of the research was and if it had been consistent or if there had been any shifts in that. But I really appreciate that that's kind of where you guys started, of just educating yourself on that, and that this is a continuous process where we're always learning and improving.
Mrs. Wooten? Other questions or comments before I go? Mr. Paulson?
Yeah, I appreciate what you mentioned there. It made me think of our driver education program. So a student goes through driver education and then they go to the DMV and they take their test, and maybe it goes well, but maybe it doesn't, but we still want them to get that driver's license. So maybe it's a matter of coming back the next day or practicing parallel parking or whatever that skill might be, and then you come back and give it another shot and get that license. So there's some overlap between that concept and that process and what we're talking about here. Another shift that has been really a positive one in our PE department is, students are supposed to dress for PE. And kind of the previous way was if you don't dress, you cannot participate in PE. Well, I think PE departments at both the schools, their ultimate goal is student health and fitness. They want students to be active, to learn how to live a healthy lifestyle. So one of the great changes that's happened at South as far as PE goes is that our PE department has developed a system where if a student is absent or sick or they forget their clothes, whatever that is, they have them come in during their access period or their lunch, and they do a PE makeup. So they're instead of saying you lose that opportunity, they say, no, your fitness is that important. We want to bring you back at a different time and have you do some physical activity to reinforce that concept. So those have been kind of two changes that have been really positive in terms of, you're talking about the time component and how that would look practically.
Great question. I really appreciate the thought behind that. First, on the retakes part, it's interesting that you bring that up. You don't need to be your best self the first time every single time. We had a student last night in a concert who just blew me away by what they did. And today, all they did was talk about the things that they need to do better the next time, given the opportunity. So like that mindset is there and driven forward. We look at our grades. We look at our success criteria on a well, actually we just hit that point right now in the semester of how are kids doing and who have we not identified. But at the end of the semester, we sit down and we're looking at the numbers as well, looking at our, what does that story tell us about what we did with our the impact of our grading system. We have that conversation with our department chairs. That gets filtered down into our PLCs. And so I think Dan mentioned a few times, like it's a process. We're not in the end zone. There is no end zone for this. It's just going to keep moving and moving and moving as the students who come to us continue to evolve and change, and the resources that we have changed. So we are committed to this regular review of our data. We review it with our district leadership and with our building leadership. And I don't want to speak for North, but I'm pretty convinced they're doing the same data analysis.
Yes.
Brad reminded me of one thing I wanted to say. Having the retakes in place before the change, I think retakes is a great opportunity for kids because that truly is wanting them to learn. I think there might be a struggle sometimes with kids having enough time in their schedule to go do a retake, but I also think for teachers that's got to be a lot of extra work to have retakes and just the administration of that and organizing that's got to be a lot. So I thank the teachers for that commitment because that is a lot of extra work. So I agree. I think we're here for the students to learn, and I'm totally fine with retakes because you do need to learn from your mistakes. I don't know how that plays out with going to college, but I mean, this is the time to learn. So thank you to our staff for managing all those retakes.
I have a question. Mr. McDermott, you talked about the kids' feedback about being able to slow down. What drives that, and what's allowed that to happen? Like, what's different?
Yeah, we've emphasized like a commitment and that we value feedback. And so when you say to kids, it's this important that you learn it, they know that you're not going to race ahead and they're going to be like 3 concepts behind. They know that the teacher is taking the time to make sure that everybody in class is understanding the concepts in order to be successful in the next one. The slow down is that they're, like as has often been the case in education, people are trying to race through to get to the end. I got to get all of this stuff done. And our teachers understand now that, depth is really significantly important in order to accelerate our students forward. And so they're diving deeper into concepts and allowing kids to explain out loud how they've come to the conclusions that they've come to. So it's allowing people to engage in that really meaningful feedback loop.
Okay, thanks. And then I have one other question on the pretty significant jump, almost 4 points in the A's from last school year to this school year. It seems what's different is retakes and then the higher weighting on the summative. Do you have data or a gut feel for what's driving that increase in the A's?
I'm just making sure I'm looking at the same.
Yeah, I'm looking at this one pager that was in our packets.
Yep. Okay. I don't think we have anything definitive at this point. I mean, we can connect dots, right? And if we look at giving kids the opportunity to explain themselves and not feel like, again, we just talked about this, like I have to get it 100% right away. And understanding that our teachers now are engaged in being able to identify and pinpoint, like, well, this is the standard that you need more help on. I could see that being what's moving the needle, but it's a good question that we can look into specifically.
So it kind of dovetails on your explanation on the slowdown, on the depth.
Right.
So, because just intuitively to me, with some of these changes, I would have expected, we have a few less Fs. I would have expected, we're helping the kids that are struggling with getting their work done or whatever a little bit with raising that floor.
Right.
So I would expect that. I wouldn't expect just from those changes a large jump in your A's because
Right.
those kids are doing the work.
Yeah, agree. And I would say that, when I look at those numbers, I look at that and say we've increased the rigor of how we're communicating grades from the 90 to 10.
Yeah.
And so a big jump like that, I don't think that any of us would have anticipated. I do agree that the move from to decrease the number of Fs, but you would also think that if you're just inflating things, that it would just be everything becomes a D, and that's not listed on here.
Mm-hmm.
But our Cs have gone up, our Ds have gone down, our Fs have gone down on the south side.
And just one other question about that data point. So that's basically for the first half of the year. Would we expect the second half to be the same? Or I guess could there be an anomaly in one semester? And I know it's just speculation.
Yeah, I'll let Matt jump.
Like I said, we're early on
Yep.
in the process. So we're going to need a long period of time to kind of see where that is. I think it speaks also to the fact that the standards remain high, but we are giving more opportunities and more routes for students to meet the standard based on what their learning style is. You didn't do well on this first test. This was a traditional test. Therefore, why don't we look at a different type of assessment based on your strengths so you can demonstrate to me that you understand and you know certain things. That, I think, has played a big part in it, too. But we are going to need time.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. That was helpful.
Does anybody, before I go, anything else? I'm a former elementary teacher, and this is kind of how we graded back then. I did a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in my grade book. Nobody got a 0. It was 1. This is, bottom line is we want learning to happen, and we want to be able to assess. And I love, Mr. Biskin, the part that you just said at the end. I mean, as a parent, a parent of my children are past college and one finishing up college, and I look at them, and I even go back to my days of elementary teaching. Sometimes kids just can't do that test. They may know it, and if they know it, there's another way we can maybe find out what they know. And then there's also the student that doesn't need to spend 3 hours doing homework at night because they have, it's easier for them to they know their way around of what they need to do to be successful. And I think it was Mr. Hanlon, you might have, or Mrs. Booten, you said it, we should always be kind of looking at what is that next step of where they're going to go in that trajectory. And so I really like this, and to me tonight, this really explained very well. But I just want to go back to saying this isn't a new concept. Like I was back teaching in the 90s and the early 2000s, and elementary's been kind of doing it along this way as it is. I think it's natural. That 60 levels, and I appreciate how you broke it out like that. Really makes recovery so difficult. And so, bottom line is, we want to know what students know, and we want students to be learning. And I appreciate this. And if I remember correctly, IASB put out a belief statement. I believe it was 2 years ago. 204 put it out there about eliminating zeros. And so it's not like it's an uncommon thing that people are looking at. Now, there's one more last thing. We look at how kids learn has changed so drastically over the last 25 years. I used to say to my students, you are never going to carry around a calculator in your pocket, so you need to know your math facts, timed in this, do these time tests. Well, we all carry a calculator in our pockets. And so not only has our expectations changed, our grading has to follow that as well. So I think this has been time. It's a good time to start looking at that to make sure that they both meet. So thank you. I appreciate all that information. Okay. Thank you very much. We will move on to our next, which is a discussion item, middle school capital project discussion.
All right, so we're returning to discussion on your middle school facilities projects. Just a quick recap at your last meeting. Your team from Perkins and Will came and shared the introductory concepts. So here's the order that I want to kind of take you through the information that's presented to you. There are a number of documents that we're sharing with you tonight, new pieces of information that we're introducing, but I actually want to start, before you dive into everything in your folder, I want to start with the piece of paper that says Community Engagement Process Draft. So if you kind of go through your folder and find that. So this document actually reflects a discussion that we had with the board's Community Engagement Committee, I think a little bit over a week ago. And really the reason I want to start with this document is just to try to forecast for you, or I guess bring to you a suggested process for getting to an endpoint, right? And again, I start with this to say, we've not proposed any specific plan. There is no specific proposal out on the table with your middle school projects. What we've introduced are a few different ways potentially that some of the needs can be addressed, but what we really want to do over the next few months, I think we've mapped this process out to October, is bring back to you as a board the collective feedback from the community on both the potential project plans themselves, decisions around how we go about paying for those elements, and any of the other kind of related factors. So without going through it in significant detail, what we propose to the Community Engagement Committee is assembling a leadership team. That leadership team comprised of some representatives from your Citizens Advisory Committee, as well as supplemented by some parents and community members from each of your 4 middle school feeder patterns. I say feeder patterns because they don't necessarily have to be middle school parents. It could certainly be elementary or certainly even high school parents, but we want to make sure it's represented across the community. And our recommendation is that we assemble that team and task that team with leading a process to gather and solicit feedback from the community. That feedback could take the form certainly of some kind of traditional open house type feedback, can also take the form of some guided surveys, whether they be paper survey, phone survey, other opportunities to hear as broadly as we can from the community. And I think it's critically important that feedback really then ultimately guide decision that a future board makes around this. So, and I wanted to start with that kind of suggestion tonight because we worked through discussion on this with your community engagement committee, refine this. But I think it helps to kind of reshape a little bit of the conversation tonight, because then I think tonight is really about understanding all the information that's here and making sure that we identify any other missing or needed information that would ultimately assist in this process of gathering input and getting to a point where a board can consider a decision on or about October. Nothing particularly magical about October, other than, especially when it comes to some of the funding options that we lay out for you, some of them do have timelines associated with them. If there are questions that need to go ultimately in front of the community, and so this kind of aligns for that. I think gives ample time for that to happen. So before we move forward, I guess I just want to stop there. Hopefully you had a chance to kind of look through this draft. Brad, Angela, that were on the Community Engagement Committee, is there anything else you wish to kind of add to the discussion about this concept? But I want to sort of make sure that we have, I guess, either understanding or that this makes sense to you before we move into the other pieces. So, Angela.
Just a couple of things. I appreciate that you made it clear that we're kind of being presented with options tonight, but really it's going to be up to the community as to the direction we take. So thank you. When we were in the meeting, I would prefer that a board member also sat on the team, but I think that was not preferred, or yeah.
Yeah, I kind of laid out two sides to it. I will tell you honestly, I don't necessarily have a super strong opinion about it. I think there's just two considerations with that. One, if a board member is ultimately on the team, I think a risk you run is the fact that one board member may have a lot more insight than others do when it then comes to actually pulling all that information together. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but you're just going to have to be kind of aware of that either you're going to rotate that responsibility so everybody sort of has a glimpse at perhaps one of the meetings. I don't know what the meeting cadence is ultimately going to look like. CAC is a little easier to sort of rotate that because you have a monthly schedule. I don't know for sure what the piece looks like. And Angela, I think to your point, the suggestion was, which I appreciate, is that a board member being there certainly communicates a level of connection and importance from the board to that group, which I completely understand. I think that's something you guys could certainly decide.
My question is, would a board member sway a community by I just don't want there to be a board member that's interjecting. Would they be there just as an observer versus?
Right, similar to how the CAC is. And I think my suggestion was one or two board members, but then it became an issue, like if you were on another committee, and could that run into OMA issues? So then it would maybe just have to be one, or rotating through like we do with CAC, perhaps, just so that we do demonstrate that interest, that engagement, that connection, and maybe even bring back intermittently, I'm not sure, in report. And yeah, I have one more thing to say, but we can maybe discuss that.
No, that was just my question would it be as an observer role versus a?
I think you would want it to be.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I don't anticipate CAC running a dual alignment with this. No. Yeah, No, I don't anticipate. I mean, we certainly did at last CAC meeting reviewed the middle school concepts, but I think actually designating a separate team specifically tasked with this allows CAC to continue to do. And in fact, I don't think CAC could, based on some of the changes they made in their bylaws that actually kind of lock in about half of their meetings that are focused around looking at your dashboard, student learning outcomes, and those pieces. That committee couldn't possibly devote that much time just to this topic, so that was kind of why we went this route. I like the point of connection to CAC only in that, one, I think some of the members from CAC that might wish to be involved in this do have some background and experience with the district that I think would be very, very helpful for this as well. That's why we kind of put them together. Sure. Hearing it twice. Yep. Totally get it. Totally get it.
2 points on the community engagement process. First, I like the idea of having the board sort of rotate through as an observer. Okay, better now?
Yeah.
I always screw up the mic. So I like the idea of having the board members rotate through CAC, because I found that helpful of just sitting in on the discussions of CAC. You have a different flavor and interpretation for it than we get in the minutes. And so I think this community feedback is really important. And so being able to listen to it, even if not every meeting, would be helpful. And I agree, it shouldn't be just one person. I think if we do it, it would be helpful for everyone to rotate through. And then in the composition of the leadership team, one thing I didn't see specifically called out is people that don't have kids in the district. And I think that perspective is really important to have on there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We do have a fair amount of that representation on CAC, so I think we could be thoughtful around perhaps how we look at some of the representatives from CAC.
So I just want one more question. I just want to be sure I'm understanding this correctly. This committee is going to bring the proposals back to the board by about October. So tonight, we are just listening, and we are going to ask, are there any more, if we have questions on things to bring in that we still need to have answered, we are not tonight saying anything about what we like or don't like.
I think
this committee's going to do that.
No,
bring it to us.
no. I guess I want to clarify. I'm not suggesting out of this committee that the committee is bringing to you a recommendation on what you do. I'm suggesting that the committee would bring the feedback from the community on their collective response or feedback,
Okay.
right? So not necessarily tasking the committee with saying bring the plan to the board, but bring the collective feedback from the committee that will still allow the board to ultimately make the decision. Right,
But that's
at the
months
time.
from now.
Correct. That's October,
Right.
according to this. I would not suggest, candidly, tonight that you dive into the plans themselves and say, I like this, I don't like this, because if you truly value, to Angela's point, hearing what the community has to say, let them have that opportunity, right? Well, I certainly respect the fact that the board will ultimately make the decision. It will have a very different flavor if you suggest where you're at and what you want to see, and then try to task the community with, now give us feedback, right? It either A, feels a little inauthentic, right, at best, or guiding, right, as you're going. And so I think if you genuinely believe, right, in that kind of process of community input, let them do that. I think your discussion would be better focused on, is anything missing that would be necessary either for the board or the community to do their job? Is there an aspect of the funding finance information, or any of the concepts? I think, Angela, you asked last time, it's the reason why you do have the drawings in bigger, because you wanted to be able to see them. That's kind of why we blew them up for CAC, to be able to see them visually a little bit bigger. So, I mean, it could be as small as that in terms of making sure folks have information, or just if there is a concept or an aspect of a concept missing, and that's where I'd focus your your discussion tonight as we go through what you have.
I have to comment on the whatever we decide on. I do agree we should have some board observation. I don't think it should be one person, and I don't think we should sit on the committee, we being any one of us, because of what's been mentioned. But even with that, more regular feedback on how things are progressing, right? Because this is a big deal, and it's going to be percolating for a while. And I know just because it says October that it's not that we're not going to hear anything till October, but I think a regular update each time they meet about what the feedback's like, if any of this is getting tweaked as a result, would be helpful.
Dave, I think it'd be important, I don't comment on all this, but I think it's important to make sure you're aware of what they're doing and how they're going about collecting feedback. And I think we want to bring updates as appropriate. Be careful not to sort of bring back pieces of information sort of piecemeal, because I think that might skew or maybe cloud the ability to see the whole picture if we bring things back in small chunks. So I just want to caution you on, I don't think that's what you're saying, but I think we want to be careful not to bring stuff back in small pieces, because that might make it more difficult to see the big picture of the
it's
feedback.
a good point. It's just that, like, if we each attend one meeting, if the only time I'm really looking at this is that one meeting, and then in October we come back to it, just to keep it fresh. And
That's fair.
And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yep. Right. Yeah. No, well, it's a good point. Maybe I'm overthinking. If I don't really get deep into, we're going to get deep in this tonight, and then we'll all be looking at it probably for a few days. And that's not like we put it on the shelf, but that's just how it evolves. It's a big unknown. But I think what you say is it's a good. It's some additional food for thought.
Yes. So we had two, Brad and Jim Vroman were the board reps. So they came to our planning meetings, because I was on as a parent. They came to our planning meetings, and then when we had our big open meetings where we were gathering community feedback, board members were there. I do not remember them talking with us or sitting at tables. Like they were off to the side observing more than anything. Yeah, Erica, did I say that correctly? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. thing I think I remember with Engage 200 is there were two community members that were the co-chairs of that committee. They were tasked then to come to board meetings and give the kind of the recap. And, you know, I think that maybe that is an unbiased lens in terms of giving us, or giving the current board, because it won't be me, but giving the board that feedback that's from the community versus a board rotating through and different, you know, it's hard to not have your own lens and bias kind of come in. And maybe that's the way that it's communicated, is through those, there be chairs or something on that, like there was with Engage 200, and they do reports.
I'm curious, Chris, if we've, not having been on the board during that time, did we investigate why it appears that Engage 200 didn't provide the feedback that was reflected in the referendum vote? Like, the community voted against what the recommendation came out of Engage 200. So do we know how we missed that?
They did a huge survey study where they actually made phone calls to the community to and
So how did we miss? Like, what did we?
After,
Yeah.
like after.
Okay.
Yeah.
There were actually two separate things. So I came in, I started in the district at the end of Engage. So Engage 200 had happened. I came in at the same time that the feedback report came forward, and then we started to develop the facility plan that ultimately led to the referendum. So Engage 200 didn't actually develop that facility plan. I picked that up when I came in based on the fact that the Engage 200 report affirmed we need to focus on our facilities. So after out of Engage 200, we did a master facility plan. Then the master facility plan led to that. So it wasn't actually Engage 200 that said run the specific referendum. That was kind of a separate process that happened after that. It was a little bit of everything, but yeah, the original one. Right.
But it seemed,
Yeah, no, it's a good question, fair question in terms of the miss on it.
my recollection, having gone to and then I think we discussed that in the meeting, was that it was fairly focused on how we were going to progress with facilities, and perhaps tying in the mission to that, because I was an Engage 200 dropout. But I don't want that. Like, I think we went into both of those referendums thinking, you know, one way, and being surprised that we weren't, or this is my perception, that we weren't clued into what the community really wanted. So I don't feel we tapped in and got good feedback. So how do we avoid that? Right. Correct. So how do we make sure that we tap into what the community? I know.
I think that would be the task of this committee. So
Yeah.
I hear you on it, and I certainly we will continue to work with the board and your engagement committee to do that. But I think that's the task of ultimately this committee, is to make sure that the feedback that we gather and solicit truly represents the feedback of the committee. I think it moves to other ways to go about gathering feedback, right? I think relying on just saying, hey, we're having open houses, come if you want to come, is not going to get us to really understand that feedback. Thus, I think the references in here to using perhaps some other types of survey or input tools, whether it be phone survey, some paper survey. I think there are other ways that you have to try to get to that feedback.
Right. And we discussed that during the community engagement committee. I think where I kind of, when you were talking, Chris, like, well, when we did Engage 200, we had 2 people come and kind of give us an update. Maybe if we had done it differently, like I think having a board member, and I don't know that it necessarily needs to be a different, but I appreciate that you don't want everyone left out of the loop sort of idea. I just think, to me, that's important to have that there. I think that, speaks to engagement. Even though we can make it clear that we are not offering any direction or influencing anything, I think that'd be helpful. Oh, absolutely.
So let me, can I refocus us then on where we were? So we were talking about a community engagement process. I think largely there's support around this with probably one detail to be figured out, and that's whether a board member is attending or not. My suggestion, park that decision just for a second. Let's go through and identify for you the other information we're giving to you tonight. Make sure you understand that. And then we can, I think, come back, kind of finalize that last decision if I can move us forward in that space. So, Brian, I'm going to go ahead and bring you into conversation now, and do you want to move into the funding elements? Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Schuler. A few pieces that are in your folder. We're going to start with the funding options for middle school capital facilities plans. That's your legal size document. Moving from left to right, we have 5 different options to share with you tonight. And I'll emphasize that There's no recommendations related to these options. These are not guaranteed options. These are not options that we are planning on going down the road in one specific scenario or another, but these are tools that very well could be at your disposal when it comes time to talk about if we are moving forward with middle school capital projects, how potentially we could fund those projects. So specifically, starting from left to right, your existing fund balance. Your fund balance as of our audit from fiscal year 22, so as of June 30th of 2022, you have roughly $60 million in operating capital. That equates to a 32% fund balance ratio. That's within your existing board policy margin of 25 to 40%. Just giving you an idea of what you could use out of that. Specifically, I estimated $10 million. We certainly would want to do a cash flow analysis to see what that meant, specifically as we get into this specific time of year when we are low in fund balances in March, April, and May before our June tax payments arrive. But even at $10 million, if we were just to purely subtract $10 million from your existing operating fund balance, that would bring it down from $60 million to $50 million and still leave you above that 25% board policy threshold as it relates to that specific area. So you see just in these columns, a little bit of a description, specifically an amount, an estimated amount, a discussion amount, some pros to it, and then some cons to each of these scenarios. So on the pro side related to the fund balance, obviously it continues to illustrate to the community that we're spending available funds on capital needs. The challenge, if we're talking about reducing overall fund balances, what does it mean from a cash flow perspective, and could it restrict potential future decisions that this board would make related to other projects outside of our capital needs? Moving from left to right, if you were to pledge O&M dollars, you do that right now on an annual basis. Sherman Durgis, we have $7.2 million built into our budget and our forecasts in the future. That's underneath your board policy 4.152. What that allows us, and on the pro side, is it continues to complete our work and the promise that you've made to the community overall. It doesn't require any specific borrowing needs, resolutions, statutes, meetings, or anything like that. What it could, though, on the con side, and I actually have just a reference tool for you also in your green package, what would it mean in terms of potential facility projects in the future that we might have to set aside, either not do at all or set aside for a period of time, and could that cause us some dual harm on that end too, if it's something that is significant that we believe we would need to address. Moving over into the middle, so a debt service extension base. So your debt service extension base began when the tax caps went into place in DuPage County in 1991. There was a formula that determined a specific amount at that point in time, and your DSEB, as it's referred to, has increased annually since that point by CPI, capped at 5%, because it's capped within the same structure of our tax levy as a whole and what we're allowed to ask for legally. There is an example, so your big sheet that you have with you here from PMA, there are a couple different examples on pages 3 through 6 that would talk about what that might look like. And I'll get into those in a minute so we don't have to flip back and forth too often. But what's estimated from PMA at this point, considering market conditions and then where potentially our debt runs out, specifically for DSEB, it looks like over a 10-year period, you would have the ability to ask for or to go out and bond without going through referendum. Specifically, this is your ability under school code to go out and issue debt within DSEB's limits, about $35 million in principal. It's another option that very well may be in your tool chest moving forward. Again, moving from left to right, so the fourth option, you will be familiar with a very similar option to this that we used over at Jefferson. So at Jefferson, the Board of Education issued lease certificates for that specific property. That pledge comes out of operating dollars, meaning while the debt itself is paid inside of the debt service fund, there was no extension to the taxpayers for this specific debt. That was roughly $17 million on those lease certificates. We pull out of the operating side of things about $1 million to pay those services. Again, it gets paid for in debt service, but it's not an extension of taxes related to debt. you would have a similar option to use, and instead of pledging a piece of property, you would pledge just other operating dollars, and those are debt certificates. Those debt certificates, specifically, there's some information on page 7 that I'll get into in a minute of the other handout that we have from PMA, but those debt certificate ranges as put together by PMA could issue or could result in an issuance of a one-time anywhere between $10 and $50 million in capital, depending on how much you would like to pledge on the operating side, and then your term of repayment, meaning 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So again, it's another tool that we anticipate will be in your tool chest moving forward. And the last one, which has been brought up already, specifically a referendum, and that is a process that our community is certainly aware of and has gone through in the past. So really 5 options that are far beyond, I believe, the options that were presented to you or that you had in your tool chest in the past. Any one of these can be used as a standalone. These can be used in conjunction with each other. We can time these out where we look at maybe one method for one type of structure, another method for another structure, another method for one of our other schools. We can do it all in combination. So there's lots of options and choices as a whole as we go through this. I do want to just briefly jump into the PMA handout. That's the biggest version. Sure, yeah, of course. 3 years we're looking at. It would come to 21.6, and yep, exactly right. Yeah, for whatever period of time, just multiply that number by the number of years. Once we go, just moving over to the PMA, if you go to page 3, there's an example of what a non-referendum bond. So that's the big document with PMA on the front. On page 3, PMA put together for you specifically. If we were looking at just issuing something for DSEB, we were looking at a 5-year payback period. The net proceeds based on current market conditions plus 50 basis points built into the interest rate potentially could bring back about $18 million in one-time capital that would be payable in a 5-year period. If you flip over to page 4, that just breaks down what it would look like on the tax end of things. And then page 5 is just another example, pushing out the 5 years to 10 years, and that's where the $35 million on the options have come from. PMA is estimating that underneath specifically DSEB, you would have access to an estimated $35 million in principal if in fact that specific principal was issued at once and paid over a 10-year time frame. So I'll reiterate. These are not suggestions. These are not recommendations. These are merely a couple examples within DSEB that give you an idea of what things could look like, both from an issuance standpoint and then a payback standpoint. If you move to page 7, this gets into the debt certificate aspect of things and gives you a few options of what potentially, if you were to commit operating dollars, whether that was out of our overall operating fund, or that would even be a purchase or a specific aspect of your Sherman Durgis, which is technically operating dollars being invested in our capital, what it would look like. So just moving on page 7 from left to right, if you were interested in using $1 million or having $1 million payment or dedication of operating capital on an annual basis, if you were looking at a 10-year period, it would be roughly $8 million in proceeds. You see 15 years at almost 11, and then 20 years at just about 13, and then rolling from left to right, a commitment of $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, and $4 million to give you an idea of potentially if you were looking to commit operating dollars, and again, those get paid out of debt service, but are not taxes extended to the public because we're using operating dollars to commit to these repayments. You would have somewhere between, as indicated in the previous specific option handout, $10 and $50 million, just depending on your overall commitment on their operating side and the payment time frame associated with it. Last but not least, again, just an example, we get into potentially what some dollar amounts, if we were looking at a referendum, would be. We're not suggesting these dollar amounts, We're not advocating for anything from a recommendation or a suggestion. It's purely just some information to give you some background on what potentially you could have access to. So specifically, if we were looking at, again, it goes from left to right and then top to bottom, that's on page 8. 10-year, 15-year maturities, so that's the time frame in which that debt would be paid back. If you were looking at a referendum of roughly $50 million, $75 million, or $100 million, you can see the difference in payback per year, and then a quick estimate at this point in time of what that might mean from an individual taxpayer's perspective. Obviously, that's different across the board, because not everybody is assessed in the same manner and has the same tax burden. When it comes to our district, the tax rate is the same for everybody, but not the taxes paid. But just a glimpse into if we were looking for a larger amount of capital specific to one, if not more than one of these projects, these are specific schools, what it might look like, at least at this point in time. All of these factor into existing market conditions from a couple weeks ago, inclusive of a 50% or 0.5, 50 basis point increase in what those market conditions are, to give us some rough guardrails on what potentially the Board of Education might be able to do in each of these given scenarios. Beyond page 8, if you are looking for something potentially to help you fall asleep at night, it's quite possible that the market update that's included by PMA would do the trick. So there's just PMA puts together some 20-year analysis for you. That's on page 10, and then some interest rates updates, just a smaller view. That's on page 11, and then page 12 just talks about where the actual money market side of things is compared to the 10-year treasury rates over time, and that looks back at a roughly 5-year period, just a little bit longer than that. It's anecdotal information for you. It's not anything that at this point in time would drive conversation or discussion, but PMA felt it was at least pertinent to share with what they've given so far, just so you have a little bit of history where things have been. Before I quickly jump into the last pieces of information that we put in your packet, anything question-wise related to either the options or what you see here from PMA?
I have one question on the existing fund balance. That's our projection.
Hey, yeah, talk right into your mic.
That's our projection right now, the 10 million as of.
Yeah, it's a $10 million estimate. So technically, if you just apply our total revenues for last year and the operating side of things, multiply that by your 0.25, which is the bottom end of your specific board policy related to it, that would give you a low-end fund balance of about $47 million. So the estimated 10 million is a little bit of a buffer there, but again, I would want some more time if the board eventually is interested in investing fund balance to determine what that looks like on a cash management side of things.
Yeah, and what that might be, say we were going to break ground in 2 years, and that's when we're going to start paying cash out. What's our projected balance?
Yep.
Then? Can you refresh my memory on the maximum fund balance? In other words, if we were going to try to save to increase that fund balance to apply to this, what's the maximum percentage we can have in fund balance?
40%. That's your existing board policy, the range of 25 to 40.
Yeah. So that's a pretty small dollar amount between where we are and 40%.
Yeah, if you think, we didn't quite have this, but if you think of $200 million in operating revenue times 40%, that's $80 million. That's beyond what the operating revenue we had for last year. We're closer to $190 million, but not a far stretch from your existing $60 million balances as of this past June 30th.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's in your
It
packet.
is
So
in there,
Brian
yes.
referenced that. You have just a one-page handout that walks through from 23 to 27, just the potential. It looks like this, just a single page that just outlines. It doesn't mean that this will definitively be the work, but I think Brian tried to do that for you, just to understand what is potentially. That's okay.
Yeah, just a smaller 8.5 by 11 sheet to give you some rough ideas of where our thought process is on the facility end moving forward, including obviously what has already been approved by the Board of Education for the summer, some short-term discussions that we put in place already with Leggett and PSI as we look forward to the summer of 2024, and then just some general projections and estimates on projects in those major categories that we traditionally spend money in, being HVAC. We've migrated into lights and ceilings. Roofing is always typically something we touch summer by summer. Flooring, some fire alarm work we're going to have to consider in the future. Paving, it's always some form of paving or concrete to touch every year. We've invested in the LLCs this coming summer, although there's no specific plan to that. So these are just major topics that are usual and customary to what you have approved underneath these Sherman Durgis, to give you a perspective of where we're thinking things could be, with some very, very rough estimates on what those dollar amounts could be like. Playgrounds, half $500,000 a year moving forward. That's actually technically outside your Sherman Durgis. Yep.
So Brian, with Sherman Durgis and that commitment of that 7.2, roughly 7.5, somewhere around that range, in maintenance every year, if we were to take that away, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that 7.2, does that somewhat keep us like level in terms of the maintenance, so it's not escalating? Is the 7.2 enough that just keeps us, I don't know if I'm making myself clear, if we were to not do that 7.2.
You're asking, will we fall behind?
Yes, are we going to fall behind? That's exactly, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair question. Again, I want to be really clear that a fairly big portion of the middle school project is capital work that needs to take place at the middle school, of which Sherman Durgis would apply. So some aspect of Sherman Durgis is going to apply to this work anyway, because that's really the last piece that I'm going to have Brian go through, is just the updated cost numbers. But what we've added into your cost estimate is the low number. You might remember from the last meeting, I think Michael shared, there is no do nothing option, right? We have $41.6 million worth of capital work in front of us at the middle school. That's the absolute base need if we do nothing to improve the facilities at all. So to your point, Chris, hard to say. There's not a super clean answer to that, but obviously the more of Sherman Durgis you obligate as a part of this overall project, the less flexibility it gives you to address some of those needs elsewhere.
Well, when you're looking at $4 million a year for HVAC each of these years, then it would be $3.2 million to go to other stuff. That's to try to knock off 41 million. I mean, it could be.
It's a fair consideration.
Yeah, 10 years. Okay, I just want to be sure I was understanding that.
So, Chris, that makes me think when you say it that way, that our 7.2 million commitment to Sherman Durgis is not sufficient.
Right.
Like if we have $41.6 million of work that has to be done
just at middle school.
School, is there a point at which we need to raise that 7.2 million if we're not we're not keeping up?
Yeah. We started, so I think fair question, and I think short answer to your question is we started in a place where we were behind. So when we put in place Sherman Durgis, we were already in a pretty significant catch-up mode, right, to the work. So we're not there in terms of being caught up. We've significantly closed the gap with the investments that have been made over the last 4 to 5 years. But I think we've said several times, pretty openly, we've focused more time and energy on the elementary and the high schools in the last few years. If you look at the bulk of where those projects have gone, it's there. We do have some catch-up work to do at those 3 middle schools. So that's a fair question, I think.
Dr. O'Keefe, I have one question.
Mhm.
So let me make sure I say this correctly. The debt certificates are payable from operating funds. The DSEB bonds are payable from
Debt service. So those are taxes that are extended out to the community to pay.
So there's a separate levy specifically to raise the funds to pay the debt certificate, separate from what is extended for your
which
operating
can be done
levy.
without a referendum.
Correct. The debt
Okay.
service extension, they DSEB, they are non-referendum issued bonds.
And we already currently hold some DSEB bonds? Okay.
Sure do.
To the amount of, if you remind me.
It's so just DSEB, if you look at page 3. So the blue, first 3 blue bars on page 3 is not all of your existing debt, but it's debt within DSEB that's a part of your existing debt payments. So right now we have a little bit more than $2 million that we're using out of DSEB that were based on bonds that were issued in the past that we are paying back. That's a part of your annual debt payments. So this is not a full picture of all of your debt on this specific page. That is on page 4 and page 6 when you break those down.
Okay.
But this just shows what DSEB could look like if you were to access DSEB alone in the future.
But existing debt, DSEB and referendum debt will all be paid off October of 25.
Last payment that you will make, that we will make on your behalf, is October 1st of 2025.
And includes
that
both.
specifically comes out of the 24 levy.
Yep. And that includes DSEB and referendum.
That is all existing debt, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and certainly when you look at the referendum bond piece, that's looking at that in a specific silo. But you have debt that is reducing and expiring. So in essence, even if, let's say, for an example, in your last year where you have a little bit more than $14 million in debt payment, if then the next levy year 2025, had some form of borrowing built into it, it's still very well could be a significant decrease over what the previous levy year was, depending on how much you're borrowing and the mechanisms that you're using. So probably too early to start guessing what a taxpayer impact could be, because there is some offsetting reduction in the overall debt. Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
Sure.
started this off of, we want to see what the community focus group is going to have, what their input is going to be, and what information do we think is helpful for that. And so I just want to highlight the things that I'm curious about that I think would be would be helpful to find out. So one is on the existing fund balance of how our parameters compare with other districts' best practices. Another is on the pledge of the O&M dollars. I know that it's helpful to know what projects would have to be deferred, but I would be interested in making sure the community has information on the critical, like how critical of a nature they are, and what the operational impact is going to be for deferring them. And then on DSEB, I would be interested in knowing what other districts do and what other taxing bodies within District 200 do on that.
Are there any other questions? You want to go back to the, yeah. I mean, are there any other questions I should say on the financing scenarios
Sorry, I thought of perhaps an answer I should know, but I'm just curious. Who buys the bonds? Like, who do we sell them to?
They go out to market, so investors will buy them. It could range from other school districts, municipalities, individual investors, investor institutions. It really depends on the marketability of the bond and who is specifically interested in the rates afforded to what those bonds look like and the interest income that those organizations are going to be interested in terms of a return on investment.
Okay, so there's no specific limitations to who?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
One last other piece in your handout that's not necessarily new to you, but it's updated. So a bigger version of the middle school master plan update that was presented to you last month by Michael and the team at Perkins and Will. The first specific 18 pages is just a blown up version of what you saw last time. So hopefully that will help you as you review and navigate through the data to understand or maybe get a better glimpse of what we're looking through. And it's the very last page at the back end of it, if you flip it over. So Nicholas and Associates, which is the construction management firm that the district has used in the past, they were specifically responsible for managing our whole Jefferson project, and very well may be another partner for the district here moving forward as it relates to the middle school, any middle school plans. Got back together, refined some information and some dollars specifically with the team at Perkins and Will. And then we hope we created something that's just a little easier to discern and navigate through. So on the very back page of what I'm referencing, so that specifically, again, is a middle school master plan update, the back page talks about 3 areas specifically. So Dr. Schuler's referred to the low side, and specifically the low side are identified, what are referred to as like Section 1 and Section 2 needs at each of those middle schools that will have to be addressed inside of the next 8 years. Anything that's a level 1 or a priority 1 is a 1 to 3 year time frame. Anything that's a level 2 or priority 2 is a 3 to 7 or 8 year time frame. So what we did is we extrapolated data that we had from Leggett, which is your architect that has been focusing on all of our work at our elementary and our high schools, and codified those dollars in aggregate by school to give you what this is a minimum funding investment, looking at what those requirements from the facilities are going to be moving forward inside the next decade. So that $41.6 million that Dr. Schuler referenced is that baseline. That's the delta. It's the 1X, however you would like to refer to it. These investments have been identified by our professionals that we are going to have to invest in these specific. So think of HVAC, lighting, flooring, anything else major from a perspective, investments in those facilities. Moving from left to right, the mid is those mid-concept designs that were presented to you by last month. Those mid-concept designs and also the high-concept designs factor into the low, or factor the low into it. Specifically, anything that is in the low whether it's overlap that's been identified or it's new that would need to be added on top of the concepts that have been presented, are included in these dollar amounts. So all 41.6 million, whether new or overlap, is included in the mid and the high to ensure that all of those needs are addressed during either one of these concepts and specifically these overall projects. So the ranges that you see moving from left to right, so low is just a static number that we have from Leggett, their best estimation. Mid and high, there's a midpoint in here, which is what the estimation is from Nicholas, and then we have a movement of 2.5% on either side to give you those specific ranges that are outlined in here. Bottom left of that, just some notes about the overall estimations, and one that I brought up that is specifically identified in number 2 is that all the lows are captured in the medium and high to ensure that what we have identified as upcoming capital needs will be addressed throughout these projects.
Maybe you explained the answer to the question I'm going to ask, but if you did, I missed it. There's a significant difference on the mid and high from what was presented last month. It's gone up quite a bit.
Because the low is factored into that now. Your capital improvements are also need to be addressed. So last time the cost estimates you had were only for the improvements related to.
Oh, so the 41 of the low was completely out of everything.
Correct.
Okay. If he said that, sorry, I was busy looking.
And
So if you're to look at it as, 1x on the low, maybe just for simplicity's sake, 3x. If you were going to invest 1x, what investing 3x would mean as a whole, and then same concept moving to the high side of things. And I will mention in here too, there's a couple important pieces that have been aggregated in the data behind the scenes. So first and foremost, any estimates related to capital costs, there is 10% contingency that's been built into these numbers. So both Perkins and Will and Nicholas felt that it would be important to have contingency built into these numbers. Those were not in the original numbers that we saw last month. Secondarily, there is also and I don't know if I would call it a cap, but there's a distinct number that defines what potentially all outside costs related to surveys and sites visits and all kinds of things like that, plus architectural fees. That's at a 12% rate. That is probably higher where we'll end up. That's not an architectural fee, but that's architect fees plus many other fees. And then on the third end, there are 4% increases built into each of these years by Nicholas on top of everything else that we've described. So not only are we looking at in these specific numbers, we've added in contingency, probably have some higher rates than what we would anticipate in terms of overall fees related to the project. And we have escalators built into 3 summers at 4% per summer. Plus we've given you a range of -2.5 plus 2.5. So we do believe as a whole that with these numbers potentially sitting out here for an extended period of time, that the ranges are reasonable. But one of the reasons why things have changed a little bit in terms of those dollars is because, as Mr. Long asked, we've incorporated all of the capital projects into these dollars. We've added in contingency. We have some fees that are probably on the high end in terms of overall costs, and we've added in 3 separate summers of escalators, which may or may not occur as a point too. So I think there's lots of conservative thoughts built into these numbers. It doesn't mean that these are off. It doesn't mean that they're right. But I think if we're gonna take a very, very strict conservative approach to what these projects could cost, we've been sensitive to that.
one last question.
Sure.
And maybe this is more for Nicholas. Is there a Monroe mid option that does not include an addition?
Not yet. So the 2 concepts that have been presented have been with the auditorium addition, but different sizes.
Okay.
So the mid option for Monroe is a smaller auditorium. The high option, so that mid option for Monroe with the smaller auditorium would be an auditorium in the size range of what is existing at Edison and Franklin. The high range would be an auditorium in the same size range as what we have at Hubble.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else that board members would like to have for future?
For the low, can a document similar to this be prepared that shows us what
it is.
Yeah, what it is. Yeah. Thank you.
So can we have an option for Monroe that doesn't include the addition? That isn't, just the basics of what has to be done? Like, is there another, when I look at this, if you look at the buildings, if you go in the buildings, and I know it's because of the auditorium, but Edison and Franklin seem to need quite a bit of work, but yet Monroe's cost is more significant than either of those buildings. And I know it's because of the addition, so I just might like something that wasn't necessarily the bare minimum, but that didn't include the addition. Or something to offer the community to look at.
Sure.
Because it seems like it's either addition or bare basic. And I think some of that conversation maybe needs to go then to like, how is this going to produce, like what do we expect this investment to produce in educational performance? So Monroe kids haven't had that since the time it was built. I don't know, it's a big jump for the Monroe from low to mid. That's my feedback. I mean, that may be feedback that we'll see what comes.
Sure.
No, I think that comment was a reaction to Brad, but yeah, I mean, all the plans, if we're asking the community for this investment in any way that we fund, we should be able to tie that to achievement or
experience.
Or outcome, yes. Or
the experience too.
okay, and we'll get feedback, I'm sure.
And I think a lot of these questions are really for that community focus group.
I agree, but I'm just, and before taking it out to the community, I think Monroe, there's a discrepancy in the cost, and it seems like there should be a mid, like something between low and mid, because.
And to kind of just ask a question, are you saying that purely based on the dollars? Right. So, I mean, those costs are higher because, yes, Monroe has more new space because it just does not have an auditorium. Your other three middle schools have an auditorium. It does not have one.
So then are we, so I almost think that's kind of, that we are kind of leading. Like if we say, well, we want every school to have the same facilities, then do we really need feedback? Because obviously Monroe, we would go to mid.
Yeah, and I guess I'm going to step back and saying that need was identified both by parent and by staff feedback around that. So, I mean, I guess I'm not trying to lead anybody. I just was trying to solve or provide solutions to the needs that were identified.
Correct. It's
So
identified 6 years ago, but I think I'm responding to Brad saying.
It wasn't just 6 years ago. So we revisited this at the front end of the project now.
But I guess going back to the idea that we have that, not expressing it correctly, but if our goal is that every student has the exact same experience, then we are saying that low would not be an option for Monroe. Correct? Like, so we don't really.
So again, I think important to understand that every middle school student have similar opportunities. And so if not having a particular facility at one of 4 middle schools means there are opportunities that can't be created, that was a concern point that was raised in the plan, right? So you can't get to an auditorium without building an auditorium at Monroe.
Correct. But and perhaps we need to identify what experiences would be missing by not having an auditorium.
Sure. Fear, you're questioning then something different, right? So now I think, and fair that you're raising the question, but you're saying based on the cost alone, then I think we need to go back and re-question the needs that were identified. Is that fair? What's that?
Well, that was already done. Yes.
Yeah, no, we did. I did. That's why I'm
Right,
asking
but
the question.
we're still like in the process of putting things together. If we're saying that's a need, then we might as well like just cross out low on Monroe being an option. But when did we like? Correct, but I feel like we're not being fair in giving the community engagement some other option.
Wait.
Or because we're saying, if we're already saying that this is a need and not a want, then that the low should be off the table for Monroe. I mean, it seems disingenuous to, if we know that it's.
I don't think there's anything that's disingenuous in this. Again, I hear you. You're concerned about the size of the price tag at Monroe because the needs are different than they are at the other 3 schools, or the other 2 schools.
Correct, but is there any scenario where we come out with the low for Monroe?
Sure, there could be. Sure, there could be.
Okay, we'll just.
Yeah, and again, I want to be really clear. You, the board, is going to make the decision. I'm not going to make the decision. My job is to bring you a recommendation around which you'll make a decision. So the board, after gathering all of the input, if a board determined that the value is not there in any one particular project, that's a decision that the board would make. I would be really concerned at simply taking that off the table at the front end when the need was identified. And again, I mean, I can go back and I'd be happy to take you through all that went into the development of this, but that's, I mean, there was years of work in getting to the needs that were identified. That wasn't just like a flip in, we want to build an auditorium at Monroe. That came out of all of the master facility plan work. But that, I mean, again, the point I think is that that's what your engagement is around. If the community clearly says collectively to you, we don't see value in spending that kind of money on an auditorium, then you have your feedback at that point. But let that process play out.
Exactly, thank you.
Let's let the
But I had some questions, so I think that's valid in asking them, and I appreciate the answers. So thank you.
No.
So let's let our community. So going back to this.
Mm-hmm. And the only thing that sits on the table is your question of whether a board member attends.
I would lean that way as well. And I started off the conversation thinking something different, and then after hearing the feedback, I just genuinely want to know what the community considers on this. And so that was kind of the impetus for, it would be interesting to sit in, and then as we talked about how that might sway opinions, I think that's a concern. So I like the idea that you had of having them give presentations so we can have some update and some feedback. That's the most important thing I want. I want to know what they think, and I want to be updated on it.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I initially thought the same thing, but if, I know it's going to be a different board, but just for the sake of the conversation, if it's us, each of us is going to go to one meeting. I don't, there's a real value in that. So I think having that feedback mechanism is more valuable. And that would be consistent, unbiased, unfiltered feedback from whoever we choose off the committee to give that feedback. So that's probably better than hearing from Brad one month and Susan the next month.
Mr. Paulson?
I disagree, but it's fine. I mean, the board has spoken. Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. I didn't mean to sorry.
No, that's fine. I go back to what I said before. I think it's better if that leadership of that team, whomever that is going to lead that team, gives frequent updates to the board. Okay. All right. Written reports, monthly financial report, FOIA report, Board of Communication logs, Citizens Advisory Report were attached to the agenda. Board committee reports, the HR Policy Committee, Community Engagement Committee, Finance Committee met since last meeting. Those notes were attached. Are there any other reports from board members? Okay, topics for future discussion. Middle school facility plan, acceptance of the 2022 audit, 2023 fee schedule. Are there any other topics for future discussion? Okay,
I do have one thing that, just based on some things we've been relative to school safety. I think, I don't remember the last time that we had a presentation, so it's not a criticism. I just would like to see us have an update on that once a year.
Next regular board meeting is April 12th at Whittier. We have an April 26th Committee of the Whole at the School Service Center. I move to adjourn to closed session pursuant to the Illinois Open Meetings Act, Exemption 5 ILCS 120/2, subparagraph C, subparagraph 2. Do I have a second?
Second.
It was who got it? Mr. Long. Ms. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll? Yes.
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 Motion passes. There is no action expected following closed session.
Where are we going?
Yeah.